Sorry to burst everyone's bubble, but the Pixar Theory is dead. We need to admit this. First, the background. The Pixar Theory is generally attributed to John Negroni in 2013. But realistically, it started much earlier, in the deleted scenes of Toy Story 2, where the Bugs Life cast are swatted away by Buzz Lightyear. But the internet took it by storm. The little Easter eggs between all the movies caused people to think that these are all one universe, and they started arranging it into a grand Pixar timeline. The first few movies were actually easy to slot in, because there was no connection between the movies. Toy Story and Bugs Life are on completely different scales. Then, Monsters, Inc. was a completely separate dimension. Finding Nemo, again, had no real interaction with toys, bugs, or monsters, so there was no problem slotting it into the same universe. It was actually 2004 that we actually had our first real hitch in the grand Pixar timeline, The Incredibles. The Incredibles introduced superheroes as a thing that exists, and so any movie with no superhumans now raises the question of, why not? While all the future movies are in genres that don't require superheroes, the fact that humans can be born with magic powers is a huge problem for the fact that almost no superhumans appear for the entire rest of the canon. Then, in 2006, Cars hit the Pixar Theory like a Mack truck. It seemed all over. After all, these are cars. They obviously don't exist in the same world. However, people then hitched onto the fact that these were recognizable brands that seemed to have human interfaces, and decided that it was a post-apocalyptic situation, set long in the future after all humans had died out and machines ruled the world. At first, this seemed to be supported in 2008 by WALL-E. However, these movies never meshed quite right. The cars have a rich environment, but in WALL-E, there's effectively zero plant life between the evacuation and the next 700 years. During this time, Earth is a toxic wasteland. The timeline given in PixarTheory.com falls apart right here. There is no way that Cars can be set during the Axiom's cruise because they have a functional environment. Thus, Cars would have to be set in the far future, after the Axiom incompetence all died out and humanity truly went extinct. Now, importantly, the cars run on drilled oil, which is a huge plot point in the sequel. But there's no way there'd be any retrievable oil left on the WALL-E Earth. So, Cars would have to be set eons into the future, after more oil had formed. But then the branding makes zero sense. So, this is a puzzle piece that never fit quite right. In the middle of this, we have Ratatouille and Up, which don't directly support or reject the Pixar Theory, because they are relatively small-scale, personal stories. The only question is the notable lack of superheroes in Ratatouille. You'd think at least one person would ask Linguini if he had the power to command rodents. However, Munch definitely fits enough supervillain checkboxes. I have no qualms saying that fits in the golden age of comics well enough to mesh with Incredibles. 2012's Brave similarly meshes quite well. If the magic powers of the witch are a form of superpower, it fits more or less into the existing storyline, and it's so far back in the past that doesn't really affect anything else. In 2015, Inside Out didn't happen. It was all an anthropomorphic representation of what was happening in Riley's mind, so it doesn't interfere or interact with any of the other stories at all. Good Dinosaur, on the other hand, puts an Apatosaurus-sized hole in our theory once again. If dinosaurs had sentient civilization alongside early humans, that would change things tremendously. Where are the dinosaurs? What happened to them? How did humans take over the world? This is a lot of unanswered questions, but no contradictions. Yet. 2017 then gave us Coco. This gives us an explicit detail of the Pixar afterlife, which essentially says that Mexican mythology is right, and people go to a family-based City of the Dead afterlife so long as they are remembered. So far, so good, even if Cars and Good Dinosaur make things a bit uncomfortable. There's no big contradictions. Well, let's skip over a couple of sequels that don't change the status quo. Then, in 2020, we have the twin nails in the coffin, Onward and Soul. Onward is a modern high fantasy. It's completely and utterly incompatible with any of the other movies. Never before have we seen elves, manticores, centaurs, and all the other species running around. It's clear that humans simply don't exist in this world. It might fit as a Monsters, Inc. style parallel universe. However, it has to be so separated as a multiverse that, well, I have to wonder if it even counts. On the other hand, Soul completely breaks the theory. The endless void of the great beyond and the loving soul daycare of the great before, overseen by eldritch entities, is simply incompatible with the family-based afterlife that's overseen by human bureaucrats in Coco. Finally, Luca has a similar problem to The Incredibles. It kinda works since there's no information about the Selkie being outside of the Mediterranean. However, why wouldn't there be any supernatural beings in the Pacific? While it's not a contradiction with Finding Nemo, it's yet another piece that just doesn't quite fit. But there's no going back now. So, when did the Pixar theory die? I see 3 points. For me, it was Cars. The Cars universe doesn't make sense because it wasn't supposed to make sense. This was a story about a big city boy finding the meaning of life in his new hometown, and the Car universe is a visual aid to this wholly American human story. The post-apocalyptic interpretation was an ugly patch that never fit, and then WALL-E poked a giant hole in that patch almost immediately. And proponents of this theory have been lying to themselves constantly ever since. However, I can see some people holding on until Good Dinosaur. That movie really stretched it past the breaking point, as there's no way that this wouldn't have had major effects on society for humanity to evolve alongside multiple species of sentient dinosaurs in a giant dinotopia. If nothing else, Rex wouldn't be in the incorrect kangaroo stance, as we would have had much better records of actual tyrannosaurs. But ever since last year, there's just no joining Soul and Onward to the previous movies to form a single universe in any meaningful way. Soul and Coco just cannot be reconciled, and Onward doesn't fit anywhere outside of a D&D manual. We need to just give up the sacred cow and admit that the Pixar theory is dead. It choked on a churro and went to the great beyond. It's been dead for a long time. Sorry to be morbid, y'all. But now, my friends, I'd like your thoughts. Did you ever believe the Pixar theory? Did it break for you sometime in the middle? Or are you still trying to figure out a way to reconcile these movies into a single, congruent timeline? Thanks for listening, y'all.